Hi gang, so the Adeptus Custodes, guards of him on Earth, sentinels of the Imperial Palace, and a full 40k faction in their own right. But the Banana Bonds bodyguards of the Emperor are actually a pretty recent addition as a 40k army, and they sort of snuck their way into 40k off the back of years of slow build-up and increasing popularity with the fan base. And to be fair, a load of missed opportunities by Games Workshop. It took a long time and a lot of third-party models to get as far as plastic Custodes in 40k, so in this video, I'm going to take a look at exactly how that happened. So our story, like a lot of these videos, starts way back in 1987 with Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. This was the first edition 40k rulebook and also the first background book. And while a lot of the background about Space Marines or Chaos would be as yet unwritten, one of the things that hasn't really changed that much since 1987 is the organisation of the Imperium itself. In the Age of the Imperium chapter, our Imperium is pretty recognisable, with an Administratum, an Adeptus Mechanicus, and these guys, the Adeptus Custodes. The Adeptus Custodes forms the Emperor's inner guard, whose duties are to serve and protect the master of mankind. A continuous rota ensures there are always several hundred of these select warriors active within the palace, as well as a small elite of guardians who never leave the Emperor's side. Their uniforms are traditional but effective, leather breeches and boots with a long black coat over a naked torso. Their helmets are ancient works of art. All enclosing and tall, they impart a threatening impersonal appearance, as well as providing a battery of protective equipment and communicators. The weapons carried by these guards look very much like spears or spear guns, but are in fact lasers, built to resemble the traditional archaic Guardian spear, which has long association with the Adeptus Custodes and appears on their banners, badges, and other regalia. The guards themselves never leave Earth and only rarely leave the Imperial Palace, where their duties lie. Their place is by the Emperor's side. So there's our basic description of the Custodes, and the same year this model was released to represent them, described in all the adverts and flyers as an Imperial bodyguard. The model actually came out a few months before Rogue Trader, which makes you wonder if this description is actually based on the model they already had, rather than the other way round. The Custodes of this era don't look a lot like anything else in the Imperium. Also, this model would eventually be renamed in the catalogues to match the, let's assume, newly written fluff. There's no mention here of gene-forged superheroes, that would all come later, but they are pretty tough with 2 wounds and toughness 4. That's much better than a Space Marine at the time. They also seem to be missing the golden Auramite armour we're used to, just some like leather pants and a cloak, which means that this description of the Custodes is actually pretty accurate. Their equipment list in Rogue Trader is pretty minimal too. They're essentially armed with a lasgun, which is presumably that spear, and a small chance of a pistol or a special weapon. That's it. There's no details given for them other than this. There's no characters or leaders or heroes. They're obviously just a footnote and maybe a way to use up an old model. So for the next 10 years, they sort of fade into the background. Mentions of them in the 90s are really rare, though when it happens, it's pretty clear that somewhere in the back of the Games Workshop hive mind, their appearance has started to change. In Inquisitor by Ian Watson, the first Warhammer 40,000 novel in 1990, our hero, Inquisitor Jack Draco, following the Imperial Tarot, goes to commune with the Emperor himself inside the palace. Yeah, that was weird even for 1990. And to get there, he has to dodge roving bands of Custodes. Squads of helmeted Emperor's companions stood to attention vigilantly, armed with bolters and plasma guns, black cloaks aswirl around ancient, ornately carved power armour. And then 2 years later in the second edition box set, while there's still barely a footnote about them, we see this image for the first time by John Blanche, the Imperial Palace, which features obviously Custodes, but in heavy, ornately carved power armour. This was 1992, so it's pretty clear the whole leather pants thing didn't really hang around that long. Anyway, regardless of their change of costume, they just don't really show up for the rest of the 90s. The 1997 Sisters of Battle Codex has some custodians end the Age of Apostasy by taking the Proto-Sororitors to commune with the Emperor. And the 3rd edition rulebook in 1998 takes us on a tour of the Imperial Palace in its opening pages, reusing this art again alongside some more pieces, but no extra information is really given. The next big jump in this story happens in 2003 and 2004 with the release first of the Horus Heresy card game and then the Visions of Heresy books, a collection of the art from the card game, alongside a really detailed retelling of all the main points of the Horus Heresy written by Alan Merritt. These books massively expanded what was known about the heresy then and added a lot of plot. I've got a video about the development of the Horus Heresy where I go into this in more detail, but for our purposes, this is the time when the modern idea of what the Adeptus or then Legio Custodes would look like was solidified. From John Blanche's initial concept drawings in the Horus Heresy sketchbook, you can see the influence of the Imperial Palace here, through to the card game art produced mostly by Adrian Smith and Sam Wood. There's a really clear sense of what the Custodes look like. The background text adds more, how there are rumoured to be 1,000 of them, but nobody knows how many there really are, how they've been with the Emperor since the Age of Strife and are the pinnacle of his genecraft. All that stuff is added in here. So by the end of Visions of Heresy, the Custodes are in a strange place. We have this whole new faction, we know more about the Custodes than ever, we know what they look like and how they fought, and what units they had, but then what is there to do with it? The Horus Heresy novel series wouldn't start until 2006, and Forge World's Horus Heresy game wouldn't begin until 2012. In 40k, they were just hanging around in the palace guarding the Emperor, so with no real use for them, Games Workshop just leave the Custodes there. But this art proves really popular and really iconic, and with Games Workshop not doing anything with the concept, other manufacturers see an opening. Over the next few years, a number of third-party manufacturers start to make models that look suspiciously like the Visions of Heresy Custodes, from early metal models by Velard Miniatures to Kabuki Miniatures, who built their range on things like alternate Custodes and even Primarch models, and finally Cybor's science fiction Roman range, which are obvious Custodes proxies, cleverly billed as a range of space soldiers with open-faced Roman helmets, and then with this sprue of banana helms available separately. All of these ranges persisted for years as the standard source for people who really wanted Custodes models, and the Kabuki and Cybor ranges are still available if updated now. All my Custodes in my army are actually based on the Cybor models. Throughout this, the Custodes as a faction were being explored in the Horus Heresy books. Their first big outing on their own was in Blood Games, a short by Dan Abnett released as part of Tales of Heresy in 2009, which did a lot to establish what the Custodes actually do on Terra all day and how they think. And after that, they feature prominently in the Word Bearers books, as well as, well, obviously, Master of Mankind, but it took until 2016, when the Horus Heresy game and model line was in full swing, for Games Workshop to make their first modern Custodes model. These guys debuted in the Burning of Prospero box game, alongside a squad of plastic Sisters of Silence. This was a single plastic sprue of 5 models, which could be built either with the classic Guardian Spear, or the Sentinel blades originally featured in the Visions of Heresy art and drawn by Sam Wood. The following year, the 7th Black Book for the Horus Heresy game, Inferno, detailed the full scale of the Battle of Prospero and expanded them into a full Horus Heresy army list, the Talons of the Emperor list, alongside a range of extra resin model kits. So far, this was in some ways what we were expecting. We knew that the Horus Heresy game would have to deal with Custodes at some point, but not wanting to waste the opportunity, Games Workshop also in 2017 released this Talons of the Emperor box set for 7th edition Warhammer 40k, which included mini codices for both Sisters of Silence and Adeptus Custodes. And to justify this, the return of both factions was written into the wider Gathering Storm narrative, which would see the Custodians return to the battlefields of the 41st millennium alongside Robert Guillermin and the Primaris Marines. Since then, Custodes have been a main faction in 40k, receiving their first full codex and an expansion of the plastic range in 8th edition. The art direction diverged a little bit here. The 40k kits move away from the Visions of Heresy art, while the Forge World range sticks pretty closely to it, but you can see the influences in both, and as I record this, there's a 9th edition codex imminent. So it seems Custodes are now as much a core part of 40k as any other faction, but it's amazing that it took so long to get to this point. I wonder what the driving force was behind the decision. Was it always part of the Gathering Storm game plan, or just a reaction to the popularity of them in Heresy? As I said, we knew the Horus Heresy game would have to deal with Custodes at some point, but I don't think anyone in 2016 was expecting a plastic kit or a full army list and a major 40k faction. Maybe the stream of conversions, the popularity of those third-party ranges, and the fanbase's love for this art actually achieved something after all. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear more about how the game's changed over the years, I have a ton of videos on similar subjects, just with different factions. And if you'd like to support the channel, there are social media and Patreon links below. See you next time.